Hi, I'm Jonathan DePeri, founder and artistic director of Gotham Arts. And it's my distinct pleasure to be able to present the world premiere of Asiya's Manfred Symphony transcription for solo piano this Sunday evening in my home. Asiya and I thought in leading up to this unusual and remarkable premiere that it would be lovely and helpful and educational for audiences to sit down for a few minutes and talk about the origin, the genesis of this work and its context in her career, as well as the context of a premiere like this for solo piano in what my goals are and what my focus is in my recital series that I've been hosting for a few years now.
Hi, Jonathan.
So let's start us maybe with, as I said, the origins of this. If I'm not mistaken, it's been your dream since childhood, or at least very early, to play Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony alone on the piano. I was wondering how you arrived at this inspiration in the beginning. What gave you that idea? What led you to meet that challenge at this particular point in your career? I know this year you have a huge amount of repertoire that you're performing in public. List 24 etudes, the complete solo piano works of Rachmaninoff, and at this moment, you're premiering your own transcription of another great Russian composer's magnificent and arguably underappreciated symphonies. So that's a huge, intriguing and captivating amount of work. So yeah, just why now and why Manfred?
Manfred Symphony has been one of the earliest major symphonic works that I heard as a little child. I grew up in a family of musicians. My father's a composer, my mother's a pianist, and my father was always extensively listening to a lot of different LPs at the time. And there was something about Manfred Symphony that touched me very early. And so I remember being attached to this music for probably as long as I remember myself. And I also remember at first asking my parents, can you please put this LP on? And, putting the dust away with a little brush and, all these peculiarities of dealing with LP discs and really enjoying the process of listening to that. And then once I got a little bit older and I was probably maybe 6, I was already able to, get myself on a chair and get to the LP player and just play it for myself by myself. And I ruined the LP because I played it so much and it became unusable. But the love for this piece stayed with me through my entire life as I was obviously learning more Tchaikovsky on the piano and more Tchaikovsky, an author of major works. And it has been always, in a sense, symbol of my childhood. So this very, very special work that you can't really describe what it is because there are so many aspects and so many memories from your early childhood that linked to this music and enhance this music and make it very personal. And there's no one else's Manfred that can be mine because I just input my personality into the memories of this music that became interweaved in so many different ways. And I never really thought to create a piano transcription of it when I was little and when I was growing up. First of all, that thought did not occur to me. Then it was a while since I got familiar with the Liszt's, Berlioz, and Beethoven and all these symphonic transcriptions. And so an idea to transcribe it arrived after I started transcribing, period. And not even in the beginning of that either. So I wrote multiple transcriptions of small works, then I did Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata, and then I did Ein Heldenleben by Richard Strauss, which was absolutely insane idea and involved figuring out certain techniques on piano to emulate the lack of hands and things like that. And after doing all that, there was really a light bulb moment, like, oh, shall I try? And, like almost this shy thought that comes in just, and it's like, oh, I have some experience now. Maybe I can try this. The idea came in 2019. So this was the moment when I was just like, I'm approaching this, I'm doing this. And the actual work started in the beginning of 2000, actually, when the pandemic hit and the first shutdown of everything occurred. That's when I started writing the first measures of it. But it's been such a pleasure and such a pain at the same time, because as you said, Manfred Symphony is underappreciated, and one of the reasons is it is very difficult. It is a true concerto for the orchestra. It asks for a large amount of instrumentation. It asks for almost soloing players within this piece. There are so many difficult parts for all of the woodwind and brass and everything. Just scale of it is very big, and I just hope in my dreams, I'm sure Liszt's dream was to get people familiar with the works that they otherwise would not have heard, because as he traveled, he was able to play his transcriptions of so many things, and Schubert transcriptions, for instance, for people that have never heard it before. I'm just hoping to put a little piano spotlight on that work.
And we're very lucky that you have done so and come up with the doubtless ingenious and demanding, and my favorite term, death-defying feats involved in actually executing such a vision. It's really going to be extraordinary, I'm sure.
Thank you. My turn now. What I wanted to ask you is actually a very simple question, but also a profound one. As somebody who is a pianist yourself and a supporter of the arts and everything, what was your initial idea of hosting concerts in your house and opening your doors to people from different walks of life and doing different programs? What was the initial spark to do that?
Well, for me, I think a few impulses that are perhaps very 19th century in nature, as I think in many ways the pinnacle of the ideal of pianism that what I think it is in a way 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. It's that kind of a thing. First of all, the home as a gathering place for communion in art and society, for the creation of a community that is not an institution per se, but like a society or a willful, voluntary affiliation of individuals with a common purpose. In this case, specifically to celebrate and value and explore and appreciate classical music, especially the repertoire for solo piano. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that in and of itself is not commonplace nowadays. But within that, aside from this sort of temple and community to music that, for me, in a way, the home represents, and which I try to achieve with my series, there's also the question, what kind of focus or what kind of emphasis and values musically am I aiming for? And I think the way I tend to put it to people is that I want, well, first of all, the impetus is to serve artists and the creation of their art. The actual genesis of this was back 6 years ago in 2016, when a dear pianist friend wanted to perform repertoire that he was well versed in, but he was going to be playing on tour for the first time in a while after being involved in many other things. That and pianists who have new repertoire they've never performed in public before, or new types of repertoire. I have a pianist friend who's trained both in classical and jazz piano, but who, when taking on something new in the classical realm, which is not his main focus nowadays, it's a whole different experience to play that before an audience. And when it's new repertoire, you need to have kind of a dry run with a serious audience, and the intensity that you've spoken of yourself of a salon or a concert in the home is very different from being on stage, right?
It's more intimate.
So there's that serving the artist, but then with what kind of, there are many artists doing lots of worthy work, and what kind of music? Well, it comes back to that kind of grand ideal of pianism, which I described as 19th century, which is epitomized by pianist composers such as Franz Liszt, right, with his many etudes you're playing next month in a big debut in New York City. There's that kind of Franz Liszt idea of pianism, the pianist composer, also the dramatist, the storyteller, the poet, the huge scale of expression that is in these sometimes Byronic romantic works, like Liszt has in his own, Vallée d'Obermann, right? And like in Manfred,
And
right?
mine is quite literally Byronic.
Yes, yes, exactly. This kind of ideal, this ethos, which I think happens to suit you very much, by the way, as well, in the way that you interpret music through your artwork, the way you personalize your interpretations. I believe that this resonates a lot with you specifically as an artist, and it's not true for everybody, but it's there. And so maybe that's no mystery at all why you would arrive naturally at something like Manfred for solo piano. It's actually very fitting when one looks at your other pursuits and how you actually go about them in all of the arts, even the visual arts, and how you talk about it when I think back on your career and our interactions, right? So to me, that is what is the most elusive nowadays. And I do describe as what I'm in a short form of what I want to present is what you ought to be hearing at Carnegie Hall, right? But in fact, often it's something a lot less mainstream with not necessarily as wide appeal. And many times those are some of the best things I find in pianism, right? They aren't the things that everybody equally easily understands or appreciates. They are something that might overwhelm you first time. And I want also people who are less versed in the piano repertoire to be able to experience that as well in a welcoming environment, right? So it's that grand depth of and scale of pianism, but with poetic concentration, poetic intimacy, which is facilitated by the kind of home environment, I think, that really is unique. And it's not something you can get just going to the big concert hall. It's not the same. As much as I love it, it's not the same experience. And I ultimately am guided by what I want to hear and what I want to feel. And recreating that experience night after night in my recital series, I know it when I feel it. That's how music is for me. And I can explain it after the fact and try to explain it before the fact, but I know it's been successful for me when I feel a certain way about it artistically, emotionally, spiritually.
That's very cool.
Along those lines, actually, I brought into the discussion Franz Liszt, and he actually founded, as you alluded to, the art of solo piano transcription of the symphonic repertoire with his transcription of the 9 Beethoven symphonies. And remembering in Alan Walker's biography of Liszt, how he pretty much was despairing, I believe, in letters probably to his publisher, when he was faced with the task of setting the choral finale and the resources of the piano, just even for his genius, after all the 8 symphonies prior, the resources of the piano becoming exhausted by the task of setting this choral symphony. I'm sure that knowing and loving Manfred Symphony myself and having heard orchestras struggle with it, that you faced obstacles as well presented by the material Tchaikovsky gives. Obstacles for execution on the piano, for coloristic and poetic interpretation, for telling the story in the way that you'd want to be able to project it. I'm wondering what those were for you and how you overcame them.
Well, there is always a struggle when you transcribe a symphonic work, just because you need to put material played by 80 people into your 2 hands. And the more complex the writing is, the more polyphonic it is, the more struggles it brings as you are faced with inevitable need to make priorities and cut certain things out. And that is the main pain, because you need to preserve the sense of the whole, the building of the harmony, or the texture, or a certain specific motion that many instruments playing together create. And you need to recreate the same effect, whatever that effect is, with less means. You're like low on your budget, so to speak. There were multiple moments in this symphony. In every moment, there was something that stopped me there was one stop of like 4.5 months where I was just like, no, this is not working. No, it's not working. Eventually, I was able to find workarounds and just seeing other options that I wasn't able to see right away. And that said, the finished product will be played in 6 days. But it is an incredible mind work, and I love it. It is solving it's solving a quest almost blindfoldedly. It feels like at times. I've experienced similar struggles with Einhaldenleben for sure, and with some moments in other works. But what makes Tchaikovsky different from other transcription projects is, if you think about it, Tchaikovsky was writing what's so-called claviers. He was somebody who would write first sort of a piano rendition type of material and then orchestrate it, which means he worked a lot on the piano. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you dealing with the de-orchestrating it back. A lot of things feel idiomatic. Not everything, but a lot of things do not feel like Richard Strauss's work. You feel this is not a piano type of writing at all. Tchaikovsky has that sense. So that was very helpful. Things sound good on the piano, which also kind of reconstructs sort of a process for you, because he might have tried, he was envisioning on the piano first and liked it and proceeded with that. So to the point even that long sustained chords do not sound dead if they're sustained for a long time in slow tempo. They have their ambience, they have their life, and you don't feel like compelled like putting a tremolo or something else in order to keep the sense of process going. In that regard, it was a very lucky coincidence to work on this.
That's very interesting, this idea of the mapping of the pianistic concept or conception, organization in a way, implicitly even to the orchestra, and then you reverse engineer it back in a way, right? You're able to retrieve that information, sort of the way he thought as a composer, had a pianism, an idiomatic nature that isn't lost, even with this amazing orchestration, which you talked about, and very demanding one.
Would you tell me, as I know you are educated in piano performance, and at some point you added other things to your professional life, and I wanted to know what role piano playing has in your life today, what it means for you, whether you have any particular desires or plans about it, and so forth.
A great scholar and dean of pianism not long ago told me that those students of his that left behind piano as their career and profession were haunted by it, and I told him in response that indeed I recognized, in a way, to have an artist's temperament, to be an artist at heart, and to leave behind the arts as one's main full-time focused pursuit in life is a Faustian bargain of sorts.
Yeah.
Which he, being of that spirit, understood the concept of it, and I think it fits very well with our discussion tonight. That means that, unlike Faust, there is redemption in art still, and in the inspiration from art, that I seek to make an active and present part of my life, that I very much could never sell away, could never sell out, but actually make a huge spiritual focus, as much really as any pursuit, perhaps more, because of the spirituality and depth of importance art has to me, philosophically. And finding inspiration in the work of brilliant musicians like yourself is such a big part to me of what life is about. And that joy of artistic exploration and discovery is something that I believe all human beings from earliest childhood, from prior to birth, actually, can benefit so tremendously from. It's a part of being human. And for me, it's absolutely indispensable. So to be able to devote some of my home part-time as a temple to the celebration of music as a spiritual humanistic rite and ritual, but to say it as a rite and ritual makes it sound formulaic, but it's something always ever growing, ever changing, ever new. So it's not something that has a script to it, but it's guided by values. It's guided by the resonance of what feels meaningful artistically, and artistic and aesthetic values, which I find a great privilege that I am focused on those, and I am focused on it for inspiration in those terms, that I can make my decisions from the standpoint of curation, from the standpoint of presentation, along exclusively, or as exclusively as possible, artistic grounds, and based on artistic values, and based on the value of what I think a musician has to offer with a given repertoire.
That's beautiful.
We were talking about the kind of the specific challenges of the transcription of a work like Manfred, a symphonic work for large orchestra. And I'd just like to briefly extend that a little bit for those kind of who may be particularly interested in the details. Is there something unique in this transcription? You alluded to challenges with texture and orchestral nature of writing in something like Heldenleben. One could imagine challenges of polyphony and multiple melodic lines in something like the Rachmaninoff cello sonata and transcribing that, right? What were the actual things about this project that were different, kind of in a way that maybe you felt you grew from creating this work in a way that was different from the other transcriptions you've done?
Well, definitely, I arrived to making this one with a baggage, with a luggage of a number of others. It is safe to say that each next one goes easier. And by easier, I do not mean like, oh, it's just easy for me, easy peasy. I just mean that the decisions that you need to make, creative decisions, ideas about figurations and how to go about them, they come quicker, and you go about this maybe with less stops, even though, as I mentioned, I had few major stops in this work. But in this particular transcription, I didn't have to really emulate anything to substitute for certain sonority. The transcription type of work that I prefer to do in general, unless we're talking about small so-called encore pieces, I like to stick to the pitches that composer chose, and I deviate to that only unless it is impossible otherwise to put together harmony and texture and things like that. And so I'm not paraphrasing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily. There are some paraphrasing just to, cover broader sonorities, but not for the sake of embellishing anything. In that way, it is a very pure project, and that makes it very unique. Like I remember I came up with an idea of fist glissandi on the black keys for and Heldenleben, and it's just like you practically play glissando like this with this part of your fist, which is painful, but it works. I don't have anything like that in Tchaikovsky, and I'm thankful for that.
Right, like so many things, I guess, in art, in the craft of art, the toolkit grows as you go on the journey, right? And it sounds like you approached this being your, I guess, one of your most recent large-scale transcriptions, right?
Yes,
you have the toolkit that you didn't necessarily have a few transcriptions back, right? So we're hearing your craft at its most honed yet, and looking forward to it being honed even further.
I have another question regarding whether you have an ideal preference of the repertoire, types of composers that you want to present, and whether there is something that you would like to present that you haven't had before, and what is your artistic vision developing your series going forward?
While there are more pianists with more access to excellent technical training than ever before, than ever in the history of humankind, which is a great thing. And access to appreciation of pianism and of piano music is more readily accessible to people around the world and is more free than it ever was, which is a wonderful thing. I mean, when I was growing up playing piano, there was no YouTube. I couldn't hear historic recordings,
Yeah.
from the 20s and stuff of these
Yeah.
pianists and stuff. I could only hear that stuff after I had formally left my career in music. and YouTube existed, right? And I could get access to these recordings that were not commercially released in many cases, right? So we live in a world where everything's accessible, which is a beautiful thing, but puts on us the burden of choice. What music do we want to hear? How do we want to play the piano and teach the piano, right? And you won't hear as much of this philosophical, introspective, high romantic repertoire in concert halls, I think in Europe, but definitely in the United States, as I kind of wish one might be able to. And maybe that's because something like some very introspective works of Franz Liszt, like I'm thinking of the Harmonie Poétique et Religieuse, for example, which are never performed in a big hall in New York City, where I've lived for almost 20 years now. I don't think ever really. That music, which is based on certain poems, the text of which is important, and it brings to mind your idea you had talked about of the Strauss Enoch Arden, right? Which is an unusual work in that vein, merging very integrally poetry and music, right, in a very interesting dramatic format. That kind of stuff is very interesting, and it does not work well in a mainstream multi-thousand seat concert hall, certainly in the US, in New York City, in normal circumstances, and probably not in most big capitals where there's a large musical offering. Where it does work well is in a more salon-like or more poetry reading type setting, which is where the origin of the concept of recital anyway, which dates from Liszt and his contemporaries, and the idea that it's to play the piano is like to intone a text, is to give a speech in a way. It has that poetic impulse. To me, that's what I don't find. That's what I don't find on the concert scene, and I don't know that that's really anywhere the way that it deserves to be. And we need more people bringing that out, I think. And that means a certain kind of repertoire, but it certain means all the great pianist composers, all the great virtuosic repertoire, all the grand scale repertoire, but it's repertoire that has a certain values underlying it, and at the center of which is art and poetic expression for their own sake.
Mm-hmm.
And the culmination of what we have in access to pianism in the 21st century being used to serve those ends, to serve expressive ends rather than to serve purely materialistic ends in the sense of a performance as achievement or as kind of, I mean, as much as the scaling of the mountain is a physical achievement, and you're scaling a mountain with Manfred for sure, right? Literally and figuratively perhaps, but it's the expression that is achieved and that's conveyed to the listener in so doing that is so important. It's the effect that it has artistically, the transformative power that journey, that ordeal has artistically, and it's rooting in your own artistic personality and expression that is so important. And that's what sometimes I think we need to cultivate the right environment to actually bring that out in a way that doesn't always happen in the concert setting nowadays in solo piano recitals.
This certainly sounds very Byron-esque.
Perhaps not coincidentally, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a big pleasure. I've enjoyed this very much, and I think it just makes me more excited about Sunday and more excited about this gigantic year for you pianistically. And I think we're all really, really looking forward with suspense to Sunday and to your other performances in New York City and around the country and world this year.
Thank you so much.